What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. In this week's chapter, we're talking all about placement. As with any other aspect of our tattooing, when we're talking about placement, we're considering how we can fit our designs on the human body in a way that honors and accentuates the shapes that are already there. We want our tattoos to coexist with the natural energy of the body rather than to be in conflict with it. When it comes to placement, some questions to ask are going to be, does it look natural? Does it fit well? Is it centered and balanced? Does it flow? And is it facing the right direction? Now we're going to look at a couple different types of designs. One of them is going to be a really big custom design, and one of them is going to be a much simpler, smaller, just a piece of script. Because especially in the beginning of your tattoo career, not everything is going to be a big custom piece. So you're going to have to learn how to place little tiny, delicate, dainty, small tattoos on the body in a way where it looks nice without having all of this form and flow and custom stuff that's going on. Now I've got my arms already on screen, and I've taken the liberty of breaking them down into the major muscle shapes and center lines. So you can see I've just used circles and straight lines in order to divide the arm into its major sections. We've pretty much got the lower half of the arm and the upper half of the arm. Now all I've done is I've drawn a line from one joint to another joint, measuring the length, and I've drawn another line measuring the width. And from these two pieces, I've then created circles, framing them in, which give me a map of where I could potentially place something on this body part. And you don't have to use straight lines and circles if that doesn't work for you. This is just my working method, and it might be a good one for you to use in the beginning. But the point is that you just have to familiarize yourself with the major muscle groups and shapes of the body. Now, before we start looking at placing our design, I want to take note of the viewing angle. This would be the position of the audience when they're looking at the human canvas. So imagine that you're walking through a gallery and you're the viewer, you're positioning yourself in front of the artwork on the walls in order to be able to see it most clearly. It's going to be the same thing when we're talking about the body. We have to imagine that we've got two people that are face to face, they're looking at each other, and you're thinking, how can I situate my artwork on either person's body so that the other person can see it most easily? So if this is the front of the arm on this side, I want to consider that my viewer is going to be facing the front, looking at the arm like this. Same thing over here. If this is the front of my arm, I want to consider that the viewer is over here, looking at the arm like this. So this would be the front, and this would be the back. This would be the front, this would be the back. And for now, we're just going to break the arm up into two major sections using the outside, which would be here, and then using the inside, which would be just like that. We're not going to worry so much about the midlines, the bicep and the tricep area. We're just going to focus on breaking the arm into front and back, or inside and outside. Now the first design that we're looking at, it's a koi fish that I drew. And I drew this for the outside of a calf, so it's really long and it's really narrow, which means that it's probably going to fit really nicely on the arm as well. Now I already have all of these major muscle groups broken down, so I can pretty much put my design in any of these places where it fits nicely. It fits nicely on the inside of the forearm. It fits nicely on the inside of the bicep. If we come over to this side of the arm, looking at this is what you would consider to be a backwards design. Because if the viewer was here, looking in this direction, we would be looking at the back of our fish. And the energy, the flow of the fish is moving up the arm, and it's moving back around to to the elbow. We want to have it facing the other way so that the viewing angle is right here, looking at the front, and the energy of the piece is moving up and around towards where the head of the person would be. Even though there is a flow that goes towards the back like that, we want to try and direct the attention of our piece towards the midline of the human body and the person's face. So it's going to be the same thing if we are to bring our piece up to the outside of the arm. It's got a really nice fit on the upper shoulder area. That looks really nice. But again, it would be considered backwards if it was to be facing this direction, because typically your viewer's not standing behind your canvas looking at them. It's like you're not standing behind a canvas in a gallery trying to peek around and see what's going on. Don't make it confusing. Just make sure that when the human body is standing in a natural position and you're looking at it head on, you're positioning your artwork so that it's very readable and clear and easy to understand. Now, the reason that I divide the arm into only two major sections, the outside and the inside, it's because if you were to consider that there's a zipper moving along the arm, just like that, imagine that the arm zips up. If you have a piece on the outside of the arm, if you do it a proper size, it's going to extend all the way towards your zipper. And then it's the same thing on the inside. If you have your piece on the inside of the bicep, it's going to wrap around a little bit and it's going to connect to that midline of the arm. So you don't really have to worry about putting a major piece on the front of the bicep like that, because if you make your custom work an appropriate size, it's naturally going to wrap around the arm and fill up most of that area on its own. You might have just a little bit of space left to gap fill or blend together somehow, but I would not worry about putting any kind of big custom major piece on the front of the bicep or the tricep unless that is what's specifically requested of your clients. And sometimes people do want that. And again, it's about just knowing the rules before you break them. But generally speaking, just consider the arm to be the outside and the inside. Make things really big if you're going custom, and it's already going to naturally just wrap around the arm, which creates connecting points so that it acts as a sleeve rather than just like a sticker that's on the outside. And yeah, that brings me to sizing. Because when we're talking about custom designs, we want to make sure that we're sizing things appropriately. What I want to do is I want to make sure that I'm using up the entire area of the body part that I'm being given. So I want to really have my design filling the entire expanse of that area and bleeding over the edges a little bit to create that wrap that allows me to connect it to the next piece. If you do something too small, it ends up looking like it's floating, and it begs the question, why were either you or your client not confident enough to occupy the space that this tattoo deserves? If you do things too small like this, it's also really difficult to blend things together, because what you've done is you've taken a major muscle group. We've got the major muscle groups of the arm right there. And what we've done is we've pretty much just smashed this design in the middle of them without occupying the entire space. So now we're left with these awkward areas that we can't really fit anything into that nicely, because the muscles have been subdivided into smaller shapes that don't really fit accordingly. Like, what am I supposed to do with this area? It's such an awkward space to fill. It's going to be a really strange design that I have to come up with to now fill an area like that around my piece that I've just smashed on there and it looks like it's floating. So just make sure that you occupy the entire space of the body part that's being used. It makes things look much more confident and like it's really occupying the space that it deserves. Otherwise, it just looks like you're tiptoeing around something and there's like fear and anxiety and insecurity, and you don't want to convey that message in a permanent medium like tattooing. A lot of the time people do want things smaller than they actually need to be, but you really want to try to convince people to do things in appropriate size. It's going to make them happier in the long run because it actually is going to look better. And even though they may not realize it right off the bat because they're nervous about getting this big tattoo, they're going to realize it afterwards when they're looking at the artwork in the mirror and they're thinking, wow, yeah, I'm really glad that I went with the appropriate size. It's also going to save you a lot of headache in the future because from my experience, 99% of the time, clients are going to come back and they're going to say, I want to turn this into a full sleeve, or I want to blend in all the gaps, or I want to fill in all the empty space and finish off my arm. And then if you have put a bunch of random tattoos all over the arm where they're not placed that well, it's never going to look like what it could have. And that's the problem. If you place things properly right from the beginning, you're setting yourself up for success in the future. Now, just a quick note, if you are putting something on the tricep or the front of the bicep like this, it looks fine, it looks great, and a lot of people probably do this. I would say it's just my working method where I prefer not to position a single design on these areas because I find it's much easier for me to blend in spaces and to make things look fluid and cohesive when I just focus on the inside of the arm and the outside of the arm. But there's nothing wrong with this at all. It looks fine, it looks good. I just want you to be mindful. And really, I think that's gonna take some practice. You're gonna have to just start putting stuff on a real human arm in front of you so that you can get a feel for what it's actually like. The arm, it's a three-dimensional object. We can't really properly convey the message, and you definitely don't get the experience when you're working on a two-dimensional surface like this on the iPad or on paper. So what I would do is I would even just grab somebody's arm, one of your friends, and get some markers and just start drawing on them. Just start screwing around on the arm so you can get a feel for what it actually feels like. Because the arm on my iPad, it looks really flat, but in reality, it's a series of curves and peaks and valleys, and it really has this three-dimensional feel to it in reality that you're just not gonna get on the iPad. So let's imagine that we're doing a piece of script and it's not really a design that has a lot of movement or flow or opportunity for personalized, custom creativity to be incorporated into it. They just want to get something simple, and it's pretty much, it's not something that you are designing, you're just tracing. So in this situation, our script, we've got live, laugh, love. If we look at it, it's very much a rigid, straightforward design. It's just horizontal and vertical. So you could say that it's pretty much a square. If we look at our templates that we drew earlier, we can see that we have a lot of straight lines that we can follow. Now, what I have to consider about my script is that right now, looking at it in this direction, it is way wider than it is tall. So it's gonna be really hard for me to position this on the arm unless I'm really wrapping it around. And that's all right, you can do that. You can totally wrap something around. You could position it like that. And then you could have live and love on the other areas of the arm. But what I typically like to do is I like to flip it with the client's permission, of course, and put it along one of these center lines like that. So you can see that it's very much in line with that muscle group. It's balanced, it's centered, and it looks pretty good there. One thing we want to consider is that this is script, so obviously the most important thing is that it's legible. We want to be able to easily read it. And we read, at least I read left to right. I think most people read left to right. So it's going to be much more confusing to piece it like this, considering that the arm is actually going to look like that. When the arm's extended and then somebody's holding their arm up, it's going to be a lot easier to read that if we have it flipped the other way. So just make sure that it's legible when the arm is in its natural position or when it's moving a little bit. Same thing goes for up top on the bicep. I've got a straight center line that I can follow, something like that. It looks pretty good. I'm really going to try to avoid placing anything on the elbow joint, especially where it's a straight line, because the elbow is constantly in motion. It's always moving. It's almost never going to be a situation where the arm is straight. So consider that the arm is bending. You don't really want to put something like this, especially something that's very straight and symmetrical, on an area that is never going to be straight. It's never going to be symmetrical. So limit your placement to either the upper section of the arm or the lower section of the arm, where you do have a nice, long, straight center line that you can follow. Now, another option that you can use would be to stack your script on top of one another like this. So this way, you can easily just place it centered and balanced on the muscle like this. Looks really good, looks legible. And I mean, these are, as always, just guidelines to follow. Your clients, they're gonna have an idea of what they already want. So it's probably not gonna be a situation where you have an entire arm in front of you and you're thinking, where can I place this on the arm so that it looks best? Your clients are gonna give you the parameters of what they're looking for, and you're just gonna try and push them a little bit this way or a little bit that way in order to give them something that you think you're gonna be able to do your best job at. And honestly, when it comes to placement of small tattoos like this, if somebody really wants something a certain way, I just do it. It's not worth the fight for me. I'm not gonna try and convince them otherwise. I don't really feel like a piece of script is a real depiction of my artistic and creative skills. So if they're dead set on getting something that maybe is not the absolute best situation for me, but it's gonna be fine, I'm just gonna do it. It's not worth the fight. Now, even though I said maybe try to avoid putting a custom design on the front of the bicep, it works fine for this script. You can see that it's pretty legible, it fits nicely, it's straight up and down, but the thing you have to consider when you're putting a small piece on a muscle group like this is that the same thing when you're working with a design that's too small. When you have something that's on a muscle group, it's pretty much eliminating any possibility of filling in around it. So if somebody has a piece of script on their forearm, let's say that this script was down here on their forearm, something like that, and they tell me, hey, I want to fill in the rest of my forearm around this script, I'm gonna say it's pretty much impossible to do that in a way where it's going to truly reach its potential. Because you can see that my script, it's right in the middle of my flow going through the forearm. It's pretty much just blocking me off from doing anything else in that area. I might as well have just created a square on the forearm that I now have to work around. And you can see obviously my square, it is not in alignment with the natural fluid lines of the skin's movement patterns. So even as I'm trying to draw my flow lines around this script, I'm finding it's really difficult. They don't really look that fluid. It's just like this big concrete block in the road that's preventing me from moving forwards. So just be mindful that if somebody does want to get a small tattoo on one of these major muscle groups, it is going to inhibit your ability to continue working around it in a nice fluid manner. So what I always like to say is that just because you're getting this tattoo by me on your forearm, it does not mean that I am now committed to the sleeve, because I don't want to have that problem of trying to work around something that really is never going to reach its true potential.